Most people think that a billion-dollar company is brought down by a hacker in a hoodie or a massive data breach. They are wrong. A billion-dollar empire is usually destroyed by a single line of fine print and a boss who thinks he is smarter than the man who built his engine. My name is Alex, and until last Tuesday, I was the lead architect of Nexus Shield. I spent 3 years creating a post-quantum encryption system that was so advanced it made the Federal Reserve's security look like a child's toy. I didn't just write code, I built a digital black hole. If you didn't have the specific mathematical key I designed, your data didn't just get locked, it effectively ceased to exist in our dimension. I was the ghost in the machine that protected the world's largest financial transactions, and I was exactly 6 days away from becoming a very wealthy man. My boss, Marcus Sterling, was the kind of billionaire who measured his self-worth by how many people he could intimidate before lunch. He was charismatic on camera, but in the office, he was a predator. We were approaching our initial public offering, and the market was screaming for our stock. The projected valuation was $1.5 billion. Based on my contract, my 7% equity stake was worth over $100 million. I had already picked out the house I was going to buy for my parents and the laboratory I was going to build for my own research. I had sacrificed my health, my relationships, and 3 years of my life for this moment. I thought I was indispensable because I was the only person on the planet who truly understood the entropy generator at the heart of our system. I forgot that to a man like Marcus, everyone is just a number on a spreadsheet that can be deleted to increase the bottom line. The hook was set long ago. You see, Marcus wasn't just greedy, he was arrogant. He believed that because he owned the servers and paid the electricity bill, he owned every thought that came out of my brain. He didn't realize that in the world of high-end cryptography, there is a massive difference between owning a piece of software and having the legal right to run its heart. While he was busy wining and dining investors at 5-star restaurants, I was busy ensuring that my intellectual property was protected by international licensing laws that were far more powerful than any corporate contract. He thought he was playing a game of chess where he could just flip the board if he was losing. He had no idea that I hadn't just built a shield for the company, I had built a legal kill switch that was tied directly to my own heartbeat within the firm. He was about to make a $100 million mistake, and the best part was, he was going to do it to himself. 6 days before the opening bell, the atmosphere in the office was electric, but for me, it felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. Marcus called me into his corner office, a glass-walled sanctuary that overlooked the city like a throne room. He wasn't wearing his usual charismatic smile. Instead, he was staring at a thick legal folder on his mahogany desk. Without looking up, he told me that the board had conducted an internal audit and decided that my department's recent progress was insufficient to justify the original equity agreement. I stood there, paralyzed, as he explained that they were invoking a restructuring clause. He handed me a termination notice effective immediately. I asked about my 7%, the $100 million I had earned over 1,000 sleepless nights. Marcus finally looked up, his eyes cold and empty, and told me that since I wouldn't be an active employee on the day of the IPO, my options would automatically expire and return to the company pool. He was clawing back my entire future with a single signature. The betrayal felt like a physical blow to the chest. When I tried to argue, pointing out that version 3 was already integrated into the global banking systems, he laughed. He told me that the code was now company property, and my access to the building had already been revoked. 2 heavy-set security guards appeared at the door before I could even process the words. Marcus leaned back in his chair and said that I should be grateful I wasn't being sued for the bugs they had supposedly found in my work. It was a blatant, disgusting lie, a calculated move to break my spirit and keep me from fighting back. As I was being escorted out of the building I helped build, I saw the junior developers I had trained looking away, too terrified of Marcus to say a word. I walked out into the rain with nothing but my personal laptop and a cardboard box, while Marcus stayed in his tower counting the money he had just stolen from me. But as I sat in my car, watching the windshield wipers struggle against the downpour, the shock began to turn into a cold, hard clarity. Marcus Sterling was a master of finance, but he was a complete amateur when it came to the architecture of his own product. He thought he had stolen a finished fortress, but he didn't realize that a fortress is only as strong as its foundation. He forgot that the Nexus Shield wasn't just a set of static files on a server. It was a living, breathing mathematical organism that required a specific legal heartbeat to stay alive. In his rush to greedily snatch my equity, he hadn't bothered to check the licensing metadata buried deep within the entropy generator. He thought he had fired a replaceable employee, but he had actually just evicted the only person who held the legal keys to the kingdom. I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting in my eyes, and I realized that I didn't need to hack Marcus. I just needed to let the law do exactly what I had programmed it to do. I sat in my apartment, the silence a deafening contrast to the chaos I knew was coming. Marcus thought he had outsmarted me by using a loophole in the labor laws, but he was playing checkers while I was restructuring the entire board. When I designed Nexus Shield, I knew that corporate greed was the biggest vulnerability in any system. So, I didn't just protect the data, I protected myself. To satisfy international compliance for the banking sector, the core entropy generator, the brain that creates the unbreakable keys, had to be licensed as an independent piece of intellectual property. I had registered that specific mathematical module under my own private holding company before I ever signed my employment contract. Nexus Shield didn't own the brain. They only had a temporary, revocable license to use it, and that license was legally contingent on my role as the chief security architect. No employment, no license. It was a dead man's switch hidden in plain sight within 10,000 pages of regulatory filings that Marcus was too lazy to read. I opened my laptop and navigated to the global patent registry. My hands were steady. This wasn't a hack. There was no malware, no backdoors, and no illegal intrusion. I was simply a business owner exercising my right to terminate a contract due to a breach of terms. I filed an emergency revocation notice. The moment Marcus handed me that termination letter, he effectively voided his company's right to use the heart of their own software. Without that license, every bank currently using the system was technically committing copyright infringement and violating federal banking security protocols every time they processed a transaction. I set the effective time for exactly 9:15 a.m. on Monday, 15 minutes before the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange. The timing was surgical. It was designed to give them just enough hope to start the day, only to have the floor vanish beneath their feet when the eyes of the entire financial world were watching. I spent the rest of the weekend monitoring the pre-IPO buzz. The financial news was calling it the software event of the decade. Investors were pouring billions into the opening orders, driven by the promise of our unbreakable security. I saw Marcus on a live stream looking triumphant, bragging about how the company had streamlined its leadership to maximize shareholder value. He was talking about the $100 million he had stolen from me as if it were a brilliant business maneuver. I just sipped my coffee and watched the countdown clock. He had no idea that he was standing on a massive pile of dry tinder, and I was the only one holding the match. The beauty of a legal trap is that you don't need to be the villain. You just need to be the one who follows the rules that the other person ignored. Marcus was about to find out that in the digital age, a lawyer can be more dangerous than a hacker, but a mathematician with a grudge is the most dangerous person in the room. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes before a storm. I had 3 monitors set up in my living room, one on the live feed of the New York Stock Exchange, one on the real-time health monitors of the Nexus Shield network, and one on the SEC's public disclosure portal. At 9 a.m., the hype was at a fever pitch. Analysts were predicting that the stock would pop 50% within the first hour. I saw Marcus on the floor of the exchange, surrounded by cameras, wearing a bespoke suit that probably cost more than my first car. He was shaking hands with governors and bank CEOs, beaming with the misplaced confidence of a man who thought he had successfully cheated his way to the top. He looked directly into a camera and said that Nexus Shield was the new gold standard for global trust. I looked at my clock. 9:14. I hit refresh on the patent registry one last time. The status changed from active to revoked. The system worked exactly as I had engineered it. At exactly 9:15, the master authentication servers at our headquarters performed their automated license check. It was a routine handshake protocol. The server sent a request to the global registry to confirm it still had the right to execute the entropy generator. The registry replied with a hard fail. Within milliseconds, the fail-safe protocols I had written to protect against software piracy kicked in. The system didn't crash. That would have been too simple. Instead, it went into read-only compliance mode. It stopped generating new encryption keys and locked every existing data vault. To the banks, it looked like a total system freeze. To the investors, it looked like a nightmare. Suddenly, the unbreakable shield had become an impenetrable wall, and Marcus was the one standing on the wrong side of it, with no way in. In the corner of my screen, the Nexus Shield internal status board turned from a healthy emerald green to a toxic, pulsing red. Error code 402. Payment required / license invalid. My phone started vibrating so hard it nearly fell off the desk. It was the head of engineering, a man who had stayed silent when I was fired, now sounding like he was on the verge of a heart attack. He told me the entire network was down, the banks were screaming, and the IPO was being delayed by the exchange due to technical volatility. I didn't pick up. I just watched the ticker. The opening bell rang, but for Nexus Shield, there was no sound. The exchange had suspended trading before a single share could change hands. The software event of the decade had just become the most expensive technical failure in the history of Wall Street, and the best part was that it was all perfectly automated and perfectly legal. The scene on the news was pure, unadulterated chaos. The stock exchange floor, which was supposed to be the site of Marcus's greatest triumph, had turned into a shark tank. Traders were screaming, and the ticker for Nexus Shield remained a haunting, frozen gray bar. In the company's headquarters, I knew exactly what was happening without even being there. Every single critical error alarm would be blaring in unison. The junior devs would be frantically typing commands, trying to bypass the encryption layer, only to find that my code was a mathematical labyrinth with no exit. Marcus was caught on a hot mic in the VIP lounge, his voice cracking as he demanded that someone just turn the servers back on. He didn't understand that you can't turn on a system that no longer has the legal right to exist. The banks had already started their emergency protocols, and since their data was trapped behind my revoked license, they were legally required to report a total systemic failure to the federal regulators. By mid-afternoon, the valuation of Nexus Shield hadn't just dropped, it had evaporated. Private investors who had pledged billions were pulling their funding in real time. The story had shifted from a tech miracle to a corporate disaster. I watched a live interview with a top SEC official who stated that if the technical glitch wasn't resolved within 24 hours, the IPO would be canceled permanently, and the company would face an immediate forensic audit. Marcus was finally forced to leave the exchange, shielded by security guards from a mob of angry investors and reporters. He looked 20 years older than he had that morning. His bespoke suit was wrinkled, and the arrogance had been replaced by a look of sheer, panicked desperation. He had spent his whole life thinking that money could fix any problem, but he was finally facing a problem that didn't care about his bank account. I received an email from the company's general counsel at 4 p.m. The tone had completely changed. There were no more threats, no more talk of restructuring clauses. It was a formal, urgent plea for a technical consultation. They claimed there was a misunderstanding regarding my departure, and that they were prepared to offer me a generous severance package to return and fix the bugs. I didn't reply. I knew that Marcus was sitting in his glass office, realizing that the $100 million he tried to steal from me was now costing him over $1 billion in market cap every hour. He had tried to play a game of power, but he had forgotten that power in the 21st century doesn't come from a title or a corner office. It comes from the person who knows how the world is actually wired. I poured myself another coffee and waited for the phone to ring. I wanted him to be the one to call me. The phone finally rang at 6 p.m. on Tuesday. It was Marcus. The voice on the other end was unrecognizable. Gone was the booming, arrogant tone of a Silicon Valley god, replaced by the shaky, desperate rasp of a man who realized he was about to lose everything. He started with an apology, calling my firing a quote, "terrible administrative misunderstanding," end quote. He actually had the nerve to blame it on the HR department and a rogue legal consultant. He told me that if I would just log in and enter the master override code to restore the system, he would reinstate my 7% equity and add a $10 million loyalty bonus on top. But I wasn't the same person who had walked out of his office in the rain. I knew that Nexus Shield stock was now toxic. An IPO that gets halted for fraud and technical failure doesn't recover. I told him very calmly that I wasn't interested in his paper money anymore. I told him that I was now a private vendor, and the price of my services had just undergone a massive market adjustment. Marcus tried to threaten me one last time, screaming that he would have me arrested for sabotage. I let him finish his rant, and then I pointed him toward the SEC's public filing portal. Because he had claimed in his official IPO documents that Nexus Shield had full, unencumbered ownership of all core technologies, the revocation of my license had triggered an immediate investigation into securities fraud. He hadn't just fired an engineer. He had lied to the federal government and every major investor on Wall Street. I explained that at that very moment, federal agents were likely pulling up to his headquarters with subpoenas. The only way he could avoid a 20-year prison sentence for fraud was to prove that there was a legitimate licensing dispute that had been settled in good faith. I told him he had exactly 2 hours to have his personal attorneys contact my legal team with a cash settlement offer, or I would let the system stay dark until the company was liquidated by the bankruptcy courts. The negotiation was brutal, but for the first time in my life, I held all the cards. Marcus's lawyers tried to haggle, but every time they pushed back, I simply reminded them of the ticking clock and the federal investigators sitting in their lobby. To avoid total ruin and a permanent stay in a federal penitentiary, Marcus was forced to do something he had never done. He had to pay for what he stole. He had to liquidate his personal real estate holdings and his private jet fund just to cover the settlement I demanded. By Wednesday morning, the wire transfer hit my account. It was the full value of my original bonus, plus the cash equivalent of my 7% stake at the pre-crash valuation, plus a massive penalty for the breach of contract. I watched the numbers hit my screen with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. As soon as the funds were cleared and irrevocable, I sent a one-time activation key not to Marcus, but directly to the federal forensic team. I was done with Nexus Shield, and Marcus Sterling was finally about to pay the ultimate price for his greed. By Thursday morning, the dust had begun to settle, but the landscape of the tech world had changed forever. Nexus Shield was no longer a company. It was a cautionary tale taught in business schools. The IPO was officially canceled, and the board of directors resigned in a desperate attempt to distance themselves from the fallout. Marcus Sterling was stripped of his CEO title and is currently facing a mountain of lawsuits from angry investors who lost everything when the valuation vanished. His name, which he once thought would be etched in history alongside the greats of Silicon Valley, is now synonymous with one of the biggest corporate collapses in history. He tried to save $100 million by being a predator. And in the end, he lost over $1 billion and his entire legacy. He learned the hard way that you can fire a person, but you cannot fire the laws of mathematics or the legal rights of the person who built your world. As for me, I am no longer sitting in a basement lab drinking cold coffee. I took my settlement and moved to a quiet house by the coast, where the only thing I have to worry about is the tide. I still write code, but now I do it for myself and for projects that actually help people, rather than just securing the bank accounts of the ultra-wealthy. Sometimes I check the news and see Marcus leaving a courthouse, looking tired and broken, and I feel a strange sense of closure. It wasn't about the money in the end, though the money is nice. It was about the fact that intelligence and integrity still matter. I stood my ground, I followed the law, and I used the very system they tried to use against me to secure my own justice. The shield I built finally did its job. It protected the only person who actually deserved it. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes revenge and intellectual triumph, make sure to subscribe to Unsaid Stories. We believe that no act of corporate greed should go unpunished, and no story should remain untold. Every week, we bring you the most intense tales of people who fought back against the system and won. Hit the like button if you think Marcus got exactly what he deserved, and leave a comment below with your own stories of workplace justice or what you would have done in my shoes. Your support helps us keep telling these stories. Thank us for watching, and we will see you in the next one.